Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
You know, stories are a wonderful sales tool that can be used to persuade and trigger a response, hopefully to purchase. And with so many types of stories that can be told, which stories can your business tell? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Have you been looking for a secret weapon to boost sales in 2021? Well, according to Mike Adams, the secret is storytelling. Mike's had a successful career as a sales manager, globally closing $1.3 billion in sales, and he's consulted with leading multinationals, including Siemens, Nokia and Motorola. And if there's one thing he's learnt, it's that the common thread among top salespeople are the powerful stories they tell. Today, Mike is a storytelling consultant and author of 7 Stories Every Salesperson Must Tell. He runs us through those 7 in a moment. First, Chris Ashmore asks Mike why stories in business today are so important.
They've always been important, Chris. They're more important than ever because since about 2012, when we hit 50% smartphone penetration in the United States and now heading to almost every country in the world, human beings have been distracted more than ever. We're continually distracted these days, but stories are the thing that hold our attention, and that's why they're more important than ever, and they're particularly important in business conversations.
What is a story exactly, and what makes a good story?
So there's a technical definition for a story that's very important. A story is a sequence of related events. If you're not telling a sequence of related events, it's not a story. And many people use the word story when they're not really talking about a story. In fact, many websites say our company story and then they proceed to tell you some facts about their company rather than tell a story. So it's a sequence of related events. And what makes a good story is a combination of the character that's central to that story, because we're attracted to human characters and what happens to them, and the surprise or unpredictability about what happens to them, what could have gone wrong and didn't, or what did go wrong. So we have a predictive brain. Our neocortex is predicting what's going to happen next. And whenever we can't quite predict, and we know stories are always surprising, whenever we can't quite predict, we pay attention and we try to predict. And that's why stories are so compelling. It's how we actually learn and how we convey information in all of life.
Well, let's have a look at some of those types of stories. And you've written a book about it, the 7 Stories Every Salesperson Must Tell. Can you run us through those 7 types?
Yeah, the first type of story is really the most important story for anyone in business for your career, and it's your personal story. I would tell that story to pass on some information, and the information would be that I'm an authority, I know what I'm talking about, I'm human, I've had some vulnerabilities and some luck and some good and bad fortune in my life. But most importantly, I tell it to be able to say, well, Chris, enough about me, what about you? How did you get into the podcasting game, And I'm exchanging stories, and this is really the clue for salespeople. We need to be able to get our future customers trusting us, but also sharing with us what life is like for them, how things are in their business. So it's really the story exchange that's the clue, and the personal story is the first part of that. The next stories are stories about what I call key staff, important people in your organisation that your future client will meet and needs to trust. And if you know their story, you can tell a very compelling version and they'll already be persuaded or persuaded to trust them. Your company story is the third. I call these connection stories or hook stories. I use a fishing analogy. So you need to hook your fish and hopefully you're going to land that fish, but the first job is to hook. So the first job is to make a good connection. Can you tell the story about why your company exists, why it didn't fail, how it succeeded, what was the narrative? And again, you can say, and what about your company? How did you guys, or your division, how did you guys set up? So these are stories that help you connect and get across something that otherwise for salespeople is statements of opinion. We're the largest company in this. We're based in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. Just facts that everyone else says that are not very persuasive. Then we get into what I call the heart of being a salesperson, which is persuasion. I need to change your mind from what you were doing in the past to some new course of action. And there's two story types. Insight. Insight story is teaching your client how you learnt something about their business, their market, that they would profitably gain business from, or profitably, if they understood it, be able to take advantage of. If you just tell them the insight, you're likely to get pushback, because who are you to tell me about my business? I know my business, right? So the insight story is, or the researcher's story is, how did you research that thing and find it out? Can you tell that as a little narrative? The next one, which many people confuse with case studies, is the success story. And that's the journey of someone who succeeded with your products and services. It needs to start with that person. Tell me how they were before they got a problem. How did they meet your company as a guide? What was the plan you gave them? How did they avoid failure? And then how did they achieve success? We also call that the hero's journey, if you like. That's sort of the more complicated sales story. But still, you can tell it in a 2-minute anecdote, and your future client loves it because they're actually experiencing what it's like to be one of your clients before they even buy.
And how is that different from a case study?
The case study is presented on websites and in white papers by marketing departments, and this is not to denigrate marketing because I'm also a marketing person, but they have a problem. They need to anonymise the story, and they typically put it in 3 parts, which is, here is this terrible situation my client was in, here's us, our company, riding in on a white horse to fix it, and here's how great things are. And the subtext of the case study is, aren't we, the vendor organisation, wonderful? But the subtext of the hero's journey, of the success story that puts your successful client as the hero, the central character, is, here's someone like you, Chris, that found a way to succeed with our help, but we're just the guide. We're not the hero of that story. And that's much more compelling. That's a much more interesting story for your future client. The last 2 stories are stories that help close the deal. Those are value stories and the sales manager teaching story. The value story is the story that teaches your client how your company will behave after they've signed the deal. What will you be like if things go wrong? The hospitality industry is full of these kind of stories. Like, the guest left their passport on the counter and then the bellboy drove all the way out to the airport to give them. That story is a story that highlights values of honesty and ethical behaviour that helps to close the deal in the sense that the client feels, okay, this is a company that I can trust, that I can do business with. I work for a big German industrial conglomerate, Siemens, and that company is full of those kind of stories, which are, delivering on promise types of stories, and they're very compelling. The teaching story is the final story, the 7th story, and it's teaching your client how to make a difficult decision, particularly if they're spending a lot of money with you. There'll be a stakeholder meeting and there'll be people there that you won't meet, but you need to arm your sponsor with ways to teach them how to get around typical decision-making problems, such as difficult people on the stakeholder group, or failure to appreciate the cost of delay, things like that. So you can teach your client how to buy and you can teach them how to sell with these stories.
If storytelling is so advantageous for salespeople, why don't they use it more often? Or are they? Are you seeing that they're using them? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. And stories are kind of invisible. We tell them every day and we don't really probably twig, that was a story versus that was just opinion or facts. We maybe don't notice, so they're not that obvious. So that's the first thing. But the very best salespeople and the very best business leaders, they use stories all the time, often completely unconsciously. So just making them aware, you've just told 5 stories and maybe you could have allowed some space for your client to tell one back, because people can overtell stories. We definitely want to get into that exchange to make it really powerful.
And how does a salesperson or anyone in business get better at storytelling? Is it just practice?
Yeah. If you practice with your colleagues, particularly things like personal story, because most people think that their story is not that interesting, but it is interesting to someone who hasn't met you. But if you practice with a colleague and share that backwards and forwards, you can get better at that quite quickly. And also, if sales teams could implement a practice in their weekly, fortnightly, monthly sales meetings of doing a bit of story sharing, so that the new people can start to hear those stories and they can critique each other and go, oh, wow, if you told it that way, it'd be better. That's a really good way for sales teams to get better at this and to spread that across their team. I also encourage them to have a story library to start. Just short videos on an iPhone, video someone telling the story, 2 minutes, upload it to your intranet, and then the new salespeople can listen to it. You can put a nice catchy name to the story and some tags, and then people can start remembering them and learning from them as they go.
That was story consultant and author Mike Adams. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.